Close your eyes and imagine standing at the edge of the ancient city of Xi'an, in what is now China, around the year 130 BCE. The air is filled with the scent of spices and the sounds of merchants preparing for a journey that will change the world forever. This is where our story begins, at the eastern terminus of the most legendary trade route in human history, the Silk Road. Fact 1. The Silk Road wasn't actually a single road at all, but rather a vast network of interconnected trade routes stretching over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean Sea. Like the branches of an ancient tree, these paths wound through some of the most diverse and challenging landscapes on Earth, from scorching deserts to snow-capped mountain passes, from bustling oasis cities to quiet monastery towns. The name itself, Silk Road, is surprisingly modern. Fact 2. It wasn't called the Silk Road by the merchants who traveled it for over 1,000 years. Instead, a German geographer named Ferdinand von Richthofen coined the term Seidenstraße, or Silk Road, in 1877, long after the route had fallen into obscurity. The traders who actually walked these paths simply knew them as the roads or the way west. But why silk? What made this delicate fabric so central to the story? Fact 3. For nearly 3,000 years, the Chinese held an absolute monopoly on silk production, guarding the secret of sericulture, the art of silk making, so jealously that revealing it was punishable by death. The process itself was discovered around 3000 BCE, according to Chinese legend, when Empress Lizu was sipping tea in her garden and a silkworm cocoon fell from a mulberry tree into her cup. As it dissolved in the hot liquid, she noticed the fine, lustrous thread and realized its potential. This precious secret gave China enormous power. Fact 4. Roman citizens became so obsessed with Chinese silk that it created a major trade imbalance. Gold and silver flowed eastward in such quantities that Roman senators actually tried to ban silk wearing, fearing it would bankrupt the empire. The historian Pliny the Elder complained that Rome was spending approximately 100 million sesterces annually on silk and other Eastern luxuries, writing disapprovingly that we pay for women to make themselves transparent in public. The formal opening of the Silk Road came during the Han Dynasty, and it happened almost by accident through a mission that seemed doomed to fail. Fact 5. In 138 BCE, Emperor Wu of Han sent a diplomat named Zhang Qian on a mission to form an alliance with the Yuezhi people against the threatening Xiongnu nomads. Zhang Qian was captured almost immediately and held prisoner for 10 years. Yet, this failure became one of history's most consequential journeys. When he finally returned to China, 13 years after his departure, Zhang Qian brought back detailed knowledge of the Western regions, including Persia, India, and the Fergana Valley, opening Chinese eyes to a vast world beyond their borders. What Zhang Qian discovered in the Fergana Valley would spark Chinese imperial ambitions for centuries. Fact 6. He reported seeing magnificent horses that sweated blood, actually likely suffering from parasites. But these powerful war horses were far superior to the smaller Chinese breeds. Emperor Wu became so obsessed with obtaining these heavenly horses that he launched military campaigns specifically to acquire them, believing they would give China an unbeatable cavalry. These horses became one of the many luxury goods that flowed along the Silk Road, traded for Chinese silk, lacquerware, and bronze. As trade began to flourish, the routes became more than just commercial highways. Fact 7. The Silk Road became the ancient world's information superhighway, carrying not just goods, but ideas, religions, technologies, and diseases across continents. Buddhism traveled from India to China along these routes, transforming as it journeyed through different cultures. Mathematical concepts, including the decimal system and the concept of zero, made their way westward from India. Paper-making technology, one of China's 4 great inventions, eventually reached the Islamic world and then Europe via Silk Road connections, fundamentally changing how humans recorded and shared knowledge. The journey itself was extraordinary in its difficulty and duration. Fact 8. Few traders ever traveled the entire length of the Silk Road. Instead, goods passed through many hands across numerous cities and kingdoms, with each middleman adding their mark up. A piece of silk might change ownership a dozen times before reaching Rome, which partly explains why it was so expensive in the West. Merchants specialized in specific segments of the route, knowing their section intimately: the mountain passes, the reliable water sources, the honest officials, and the dangerous bandits. The goods that traveled these routes read like a catalog of ancient luxuries. Fact 9. While silk flowed westward, equally precious commodities moved east. Glassware from Rome, which the Chinese initially believed was a type of precious stone. Spices like cinnamon, pepper, and ginger that could preserve food and demonstrate wealth. Precious stones, including lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, jade from Khotan, and rubies from Burma. Exotic animals like lions, peacocks, and ostriches. And perhaps most importantly, gold and silver that formed the currency of empire. The caravans have left the safety of Xi'an behind, and now they venture into the vast expanses of Central Asia. Picture yourself traveling with them, the rhythmic plodding of camels' feet creating a meditative soundtrack as the landscape transforms from the fertile lands of China into something entirely different, the beginning of the desert corridors that will test every traveler's resolve. Fact 10. The Bactrian camel became the unsung hero of the Silk Road, perfectly evolved for this punishing journey. Unlike their single-humped Arabian cousins, these 2-humped camels could carry up to 500 pounds of cargo and survive for days without water, their humps storing fat that could be converted to energy and moisture. They could withstand temperature swings from minus 40 degrees to plus 100 degrees Fahrenheit, making them ideal for the extreme continental climate of Central Asia. Merchants called them ships of the desert, and without them, the Silk Road as we know it could never have existed. A single caravan might include anywhere from a dozen to several hundred camels, their bells jingling in harmony as they walked, creating a symphony that echoed across the empty plains. As these caravans pushed westward, they faced their first great challenge: the Taklamakan Desert. Fact 11. The name Taklamakan roughly translates to go in, and you won't come out, or the place of no return in the Uyghur language, and this reputation was well earned. This desert, one of the largest sandy deserts in the world, forced the Silk Road to split into northern and southern routes that skirted its edges. The desert was so feared that local legends spoke of evil spirits and singing sands that lured travelers to their doom. Even today, archaeologists find remarkably preserved remains of ancient travelers who didn't make it, their bodies naturally mummified by the desert's extreme dryness, frozen in time as eternal witnesses to the Silk Road's dangers. But along these desert routes, civilizations bloomed wherever water could be found. The oasis cities of the Taklamakan Basin, places like Kashgar, Khotan, Kucha, and Dunhuang became some of the wealthiest and most cosmopolitan cities of the ancient world. These weren't merely rest stops. They were thriving cultural centers where East truly met West. In Kashgar's bazaar, you might hear a dozen languages in an afternoon: Chinese, Persian, Sogdian, Sanskrit, Turkic dialects, and more. Merchants from Rome rubbed shoulders with Buddhist monks from India, Persian priests, and Chinese officials, all drawn by the promise of profit and the necessity of the trade route. The air in these markets was thick with the scent of exotic spices, and the sounds of bargaining created a constant, lively hum. Dunhuang, at the edge of China proper, became particularly significant in our story. Fact 13. This city served as the gateway between China and the western regions, and it housed one of the Silk Road's greatest treasures, the Mogao Caves, also known as the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas. Beginning in 366 CE, Buddhist monks and merchants carved nearly 500 caves into the cliffsides, filling them with stunning murals and sculptures. These weren't just religious sites. They were galleries of Silk Road life, depicting merchants, soldiers, musicians, and dancers from dozens of different cultures. In 1900, a Taoist monk discovered a sealed library cave containing over 50,000 manuscripts and artworks dating from the 4th to 11th centuries, preserved perfectly by the desert air, one of the greatest archaeological finds in history, a time capsule of the Silk Road's golden age. The people who truly made the Silk Road function were often overlooked in historical accounts. Fact 14. The Sogdians, an Iranian people from the region around Samarkand and Bukhara in modern Uzbekistan, became the era's greatest international merchants and the Silk Road's middlemen extraordinaire. They established trading colonies from China to the Mediterranean, creating a vast commercial network held together by family ties and shared language. Sogdian merchants were so skilled at languages that they served as translators and interpreters throughout Central Asia. They were also religious pluralists, easily adopting Buddhism, Christianity, Manichaeism, or Islam as needed for business, though many maintained Zoroastrian beliefs. Without the Sogdians' commercial genius and cultural adaptability, the Silk Road network would have been far less efficient, far less connected. As our imaginary caravan continues westward, the landscape shifts again, and the air grows thinner. Fact 15. Rising ahead, are the Pamir Mountains, known as the roof of the world, where passes reach heights of over 15,000 feet. Medieval travelers reported that fires gave no heat at these altitudes, that food couldn't be properly cooked, and that the air was so thin that even the hardiest travelers struggled to breathe. The Venetian explorer Marco Polo, traveling the Silk Road in the 13th century, wrote that the journey through the Pamirs took 40 days, and that no birds fly here because of the height and the cold. Yet even these formidable barriers couldn't stop the flow of trade. During summer months, caravans would tackle these passes, their members wrapping themselves in layers of felt and fur, knowing that the profits waiting on the other side justified the risk and the suffering. Descending from the mountains, travelers found themselves approaching some of the Silk Road's most magnificent cities. Fact 16. Samarkand, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Central Asia, became known as the Pearl of the Eastern Islamic world. Founded in the 7th century BCE, it reached its zenith under various empires, but particularly during the reign of Timur, known as Tamerlane, in the 14th century. The city's Registan Square, with its 3 madrasas covered in intricate blue tilework, became an architectural wonder that still stands today. But even in earlier periods, Samarkand was a crucial Silk Road hub where the great trade routes converged, where papermaking technology from China was transmitted to the Islamic world around 750 CE, and where scholars from different cultures exchanged knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and medicine in gardens filled with the scent of roses. The Silk Road wasn't merely a conduit for material goods and knowledge. It also became a pathway for religions to spread across continents. Fact 17. Buddhism's journey from India to China and beyond represents one of the Silk Road's most profound cultural exchanges. Buddhist monks traveled as missionaries along the trade routes, often serving as translators and teachers in oasis cities. They established monasteries that served as rest stops, libraries, and educational centers. The religion transformed as it traveled. Indian Buddhism evolved into distinct Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and Tibetan forms, each influenced by the cultures it encountered along the Silk Road. Similarly, Nestorian Christianity, Manichaeism, Judaism, and later Islam all spread along these routes, making the Silk Road a corridor of faith as much as commerce, a highway of the soul as well as a road of gold and silk. But with all this wealth flowing along these routes, security became a paramount concern. Fact 18. The Chinese Han Dynasty established a sophisticated system of beacon towers and garrison towns along the Silk Road to protect merchants and assert control. These watchtowers, many still standing today in the deserts of western China, could relay signals using smoke by day and fire by night, allowing messages to travel hundreds of miles in hours, an ancient early warning system against raiders and invaders. The garrisons provided military protection and also enforced the Chinese tribute system, where foreign kingdoms acknowledged Chinese supremacy in exchange for trading rights and military protection. This was the beginning of what historians call the Pax Sinica, the Chinese peace, that made safe commerce possible along the eastern portions of the route. As night falls across the desert and our caravan makes camp near an ancient well, the merchants gather around fires, sharing stories in multiple languages, their goods secured under watchful guards. The stars above are the same stars that have guided countless travelers before them and will guide countless more. Tomorrow, they will continue their journey toward the great Persian empires that controlled the western portions of this legendary road. But for now, they rest, and so should you. Our caravan now enters the realm of ancient Persia, where the morning sun illuminates cities of breathtaking beauty and gardens that seem to defy the surrounding desert. Here, in these lands, between the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf, empires rose that would shape the very nature of Silk Road commerce, transforming simple trade into an art form of diplomacy, luxury, and power. Fact 19. The Parthian Empire, which ruled from 247 BCE to 224 CE, positioned itself as the essential intermediary between Rome and China, and they guarded this position jealously. The Parthians deliberately prevented direct contact between the Roman and Chinese empires, ensuring that all trade passed through their hands. They would buy Chinese silk relatively cheaply in the East and sell it at enormous markups to Roman buyers in the West, effectively controlling the price of one of the ancient world's most desired commodities. This monopoly made the Parthian Empire extraordinarily wealthy, and their capital of Ctesiphon became one of the largest cities in the ancient world, home to perhaps 500,000 people at its peak. Its great arched palace visible for miles across the Mesopotamian plains. The Persian influence on the Silk Road extended far beyond mere commerce. Fact 20. The ancient Persian royal road built by the Achaemenid Empire around 500 BCE served as one of the Silk Road's important precursors and later became integrated into the network itself. This remarkable highway stretched over 1,500 miles from Sardis in modern-day Turkey to Susa in Persia, complete with way stations, relay posts, and royal messengers who could traverse the entire route in just 7 days, a journey that would take ordinary travelers 3 months. The Greek historian Herodotus marveled at the Persian postal system, writing, "Neither snow nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds." Words later adopted as the unofficial motto of the United States Postal Service, connecting ancient Persia to the modern world in an unexpected way. As the Parthians gave way to the Sasanian Empire in 224 CE, Persian engagement with the Silk Road evolved into something even more sophisticated. Fact 21. The Sasanian Persians didn't just facilitate trade, they actively participated in cultural and technological exchange, becoming creators as well as carriers. Sasanian artisans became renowned throughout the medieval world for their metalwork, textiles, and glassware, which featured intricate designs that blended Persian, Roman, and Central Asian motifs. Persian silver plates depicting royal hunting scenes were prized possessions from China to Scandinavia, passing from hand to hand as gifts between kings and symbols of ultimate luxury. The Sasanians also became patrons of learning, establishing centers of scholarship where Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian astronomy merged into a cosmopolitan intellectual tradition that would later influence the Islamic Golden Age. The cities of Persia became legendary destinations for Silk Road travelers, places of wonder and respite. Fact 22. Merv, located in what is now Turkmenistan, was described by Arab geographers as the mother of the world and may have been the world's largest city in the 12th century, with a population exceeding 1 million. This oasis city controlled crucial water resources through an ingenious system of underground channels called qanats, which transported water from distant mountains without loss to evaporation, an engineering marvel that kept the desert city green and flourishing. Merv's libraries were said to rival those of Baghdad, and its observatories advanced astronomical knowledge that would guide navigators for centuries. The city's prosperity came directly from its position on the Silk Road, where merchants could rest in lavish caravanserais, fortified inns that provided security, storage, and community for traveling traders. These caravanserais themselves became institutions central to Silk Road culture, deserving of their own place in our story. Fact 23. A typical caravanserai was built around a large courtyard where animals could be secured with two-story structures surrounding it. The ground floor for storage and stables, the upper floor for sleeping quarters. The largest could accommodate hundreds of travelers and thousands of animals simultaneously. Many caravanserais were built as acts of piety or public works by wealthy merchants or rulers, offering free lodging to travelers regardless of their religion or origin. They were spaced roughly a day's journey apart, about 20 to 30 miles, creating a network of safety across otherwise dangerous territories. Inside these walls, strangers became temporary communities, sharing meals, information about road conditions ahead, and stories from distant lands, creating friendships that might last only a night but would be remembered for a lifetime. But the Silk Road carried more than silk and spices. It also transmitted innovations that would reshape civilizations in ways the original inventors could never have imagined. Fact 24. Paper-making technology, invented in China around 105 CE by a court official named Kai Lun, reached the Islamic world through a pivotal event in 751 CE, the Battle of Talas, fought between the Chinese Tang dynasty and the Islamic Abbasid Caliphate in modern-day Kazakhstan. After the Chinese defeat, several captured Chinese papermakers were brought to Samarkand, where they revealed the secrets of paper production. Within decades, paper mills operated throughout the Islamic world, and by the 11th century, paper had reached Europe via Muslim Spain. This seemingly simple technology transfer revolutionized record-keeping, scholarship, and eventually enabled the printing press, arguably making it one of the Silk Road's most consequential exchanges, more valuable than all the silk and gold combined. The Persian leg of the Silk Road also witnessed the spread of new agricultural products that would transform cuisines worldwide. Fact 25. Crops and cultivation techniques traveled both directions along the trade routes in what might be called the Columbian Exchange of the ancient world. Peaches and apricots journeyed westward from China, their names in Persian and Arabic still revealing their Chinese origins. Pistachios, spinach, and eggplants moved eastward from Persia and Central Asia. The watermelon originated in Africa, but was cultivated and improved in Persia, before spreading to China, where it became a beloved summer fruit. Cotton cultivation techniques spread from India throughout the Silk Road regions, eventually clothing much of the world. These exchanges happened gradually over centuries as merchants and travelers carried seeds and growing knowledge, fundamentally altering what people ate across 3 continents. The movement of ideas along the Silk Road sometimes had unexpected consequences, creating new knowledge from the meeting of different traditions. Fact 26. Medical knowledge from different traditions merged in Persian cities, where Greek, Chinese, Indian, and Persian physicians encountered each other's practices. The Persian physician Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi, working in Baghdad, and Rai in the 9th and 10th centuries, wrote comprehensive medical encyclopedias that synthesized Greek, Indian, and Persian medical knowledge accumulated via Silk Road exchanges. His works on smallpox and measles were so advanced they remained medical textbooks in Europe until the 17th century. Similarly, surgical instruments and techniques, pharmaceutical preparations using herbs from across Asia, and understanding of diseases all benefited from this cross-cultural medical dialogue, saving countless lives through shared wisdom. Yet, the Silk Road also carried invisible and deadly cargo, reminding us that connection brings both blessings and curses. Fact 27. The Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century, likely traveled westward along the Silk Road from Central Asia. The plague bacterium, carried by fleas on black rats, found perfect vectors in the merchant caravans and ships that connected the medieval world. In 1346, the disease reached the Crimean trading port of Kaffa, where Genoese merchants contracted it before sailing to Mediterranean ports, ultimately triggering a pandemic that killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population. This tragic transmission demonstrates how the Silk Road's connections, which brought so much prosperity and cultural exchange, could also spread catastrophe with equal efficiency. The very networks that united civilizations also meant that no region remained isolated from distant events, for better and for worse. As our caravan prepares to depart Persian lands, moving ever westward toward the Mediterranean, the merchants count their profits and losses, aware that they are part of something far greater than individual transactions. They are threads in a vast tapestry connecting the known world, carrying not just goods, but the seeds of ideas, beliefs, and changes that will echo through centuries. The evening stars begin to appear above the desert horizon, and in their ancient light, we rest before the next leg of our journey. As we journey westward, the landscape begins to change once more. The endless deserts of Central Asia gradually give way to greener lands, and in the distance, the shimmering waters of the Mediterranean Sea beckon. Our caravan approaches the great cities of the Roman Empire, where the desire for Eastern luxuries has shaped economies, influenced fashion, and even changed the course of politics. Fact 28. The Romans had only the vaguest understanding of where silk actually came from, spinning elaborate myths about its origin. Many Romans believed that silk grew on trees like leaves, or that it was combed from special water plants. The Greek geographer Pausanias wrote that silk came from a mysterious island where it was made by creatures he called Ceres, which might have been his misunderstanding of silkworms. Some Roman writers believed the Ceres, the silk people, were impossibly tall, lived for more than 200 years, and possessed mysterious powers. This ignorance was partly due to the many intermediaries along the Silk Road who had every reason to maintain the mystery and thus preserve their profits. The Mediterranean terminus of the Silk Road brought together cultures in spectacular fashion. Fact 29. The ancient city of Antioch, located in modern-day Turkey, became one of the Roman Empire's greatest Silk Road terminals. At its height, it was the empire's third-largest city, home to perhaps 500,000 people. Here, Syrian merchants specialized in the silk trade, buying raw silk from Persian middlemen and employing skilled artisans to weave it into finished garments using Roman styles and dyes. The workshops of Antioch became famous throughout the empire, and Syrian silk merchants established trading houses in Rome itself, becoming fabulously wealthy. The city's streets were a kaleidoscope of cultures: Roman soldiers, Greek philosophers, Jewish merchants, Persian traders, and Egyptian sailors, all mingling in markets that never seemed to sleep. The Roman appetite for silk created economic concerns that sound surprisingly modern, McThirty. The trade deficit caused by silk imports became a serious political issue in Rome. The Emperor Tiberius actually issued an edict forbidding men from wearing silk, though this was largely ignored by wealthy Romans who saw silk garments as the ultimate status symbol. The problem was that Rome produced relatively few goods that the East wanted in exchange. Mostly gold and silver coins flowed eastward, draining Roman treasuries. Some historians estimate that by the 1st century CE, the annual trade deficit with the East amounted to millions of gold coins, a hemorrhaging of wealth that concerned Roman statesmen and may have contributed to the empire's eventual economic troubles. But silk wasn't the only luxury flowing into Rome from the Silk Road. Fact 31. Spices became equally important and equally expensive. Black pepper was so valuable, it was sometimes used as currency, and it was counted out peppercorn by peppercorn in transactions. When Alaric the Visigoth besieged Rome in 408 CE, part of the ransom he demanded included 3,000 pounds of pepper. Cinnamon, which came from Sri Lanka via Indian Ocean trade routes that connected to the Silk Road network, was worth more than its weight in silver. The Roman Emperor Nero reportedly burned a year's supply of cinnamon at his wife's funeral as a display of grief and wealth. These spices didn't just flavor food, they preserved it, masked the taste of spoilage, and served as medicine in an age when the line between food and pharmacy was blurred. The technology of the Silk Road flowed in both directions, though often more slowly westward than eastward. Fact 32. Roman glass-making techniques eventually made their way eastward along the Silk Road, causing wonder in China, where glass was initially believed to be a precious stone. The Chinese called it liu li and valued it more highly than jade. Meanwhile, Chinese innovations in metallurgy, including advanced iron casting techniques that wouldn't appear in Europe for centuries, slowly diffused westward. The stirrup, a seemingly simple invention that revolutionized cavalry warfare, traveled from China through the steppes and eventually reached Europe by the 8th century, fundamentally changing medieval warfare. These technological exchanges happened gradually, often taking centuries to complete their journeys. The maritime routes began to complement and eventually compete with the overland Silk Road. Fact 33. While caravans plodded across Central Asia, ships were also carrying goods along what historians call the Maritime Silk Road. From Chinese ports, vessels sailed to Southeast Asia, then to India, and eventually to the Persian Gulf and Red Sea, from where goods could be transported overland to Mediterranean ports. These sea routes were faster and could carry more cargo, though they were subject to monsoons and pirates. By the Song dynasty in China, which lasted from 960 to 1279 CE, the maritime routes were handling an increasingly large share of east-west trade. The great Chinese Admiral Zheng He's voyages in the early 15th century, with fleets of massive treasure ships, represented the pinnacle of this maritime Silk Road reaching as far as the east coast of Africa. The desire to bypass Silk Road middlemen and monopolies would eventually reshape the world. Fact 34. In the 6th century CE, 2 Nestorian Christian monks, possibly working as spies for the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, managed to smuggle silkworm eggs out of China hidden in hollow bamboo staffs. This act of industrial espionage broke China's millennia-old monopoly on silk production. The monks brought the eggs to Constantinople, where the Byzantines established their own silk industry, though Chinese silk remained superior in quality for centuries. This marked the beginning of the end of the original Silk Road's dominance, as the most precious commodity it carried could now be produced elsewhere. The monopoly that had lasted 3,000 years was finally broken by 2 monks and a walking stick. Yet even as silk production spread, the Silk Road adapted and evolved. Deck 35. During the Islamic Golden Age, from roughly the 8th to the 14th centuries, Muslim merchants and scholars revitalized the Silk Road, creating a vast commercial network that stretched from Spain to Indonesia. Baghdad, under the Abbasid Caliphate, became a central hub where East met West, and the House of Wisdom, a great library and research center, became a repository for knowledge from across the known world. Here, scholars translated works from Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, and Chinese, preserving and building upon ancient wisdom. The Islamic networks brought not just goods, but also advanced mathematics, including algebra and algorithms, from the East to Europe, where they would fuel the Renaissance centuries later. The stories told along the Silk Road became as valuable as the goods carried. Fact 36. The famous collection of Middle Eastern folk tales, known as 1001 Nights, includes stories that clearly show Silk Road influences. Tales feature merchants traveling to China, magical objects from distant lands, and characters from diverse cultures meeting in cosmopolitan cities. These stories, told and retold in caravanserais and marketplaces from Baghdad to Samarkand, reflected the reality of the Silk Road world, a place where the impossible seemed possible, where fortunes could be made or lost, and where every stranger might carry tales of wonders from beyond the horizon. Sinbad the sailor's voyages, while fantastical, were inspired by real merchant adventures along the maritime Silk Road. As the stars wheel overhead and our caravan settles for the night near a Byzantine trading post, the merchants share wine and stories, each tale a thread in the great tapestry of the Silk Road. Tomorrow, we'll explore how this magnificent network began to transform, how new routes opened and old ones faded, and how the very idea of the Silk Road would inspire explorers for centuries to come. But for now, rest easy, letting the gentle rhythm of ancient commerce lull you toward peaceful dreams. As centuries pass, the Silk Road evolves like a living thing, adapting to empires that rise and fall, to changing tastes and technologies, to the slow turning of history's wheel. We find ourselves now in the medieval period, where the Silk Road experiences both its greatest flourishing and the seeds of its eventual decline. Fact 37. The Mongol Empire's rise in the 13th century created what historians call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, which paradoxically made the Silk Road safer than it had ever been. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, a vast territory stretching from Korea to Hungary fell under single rule. The Mongols established a sophisticated relay system called the Yam, with posting stations every 25 to 30 miles, where official messengers could change horses. A message could travel from one end of the empire to the other in just weeks, a feat of communication that wouldn't be matched until the telegraph. For merchants, this meant unprecedented safety. The Mongols ruthlessly punished bandits and guaranteed safe passage for traders, who paid taxes in exchange for protection. It was during this Mongol peace that one of history's most famous travelers made his journey. Fact 38. Marco Polo, a Venetian merchant, traveled the Silk Road from 1271 to 1295, spending 17 years in the service of Kublai Khan, the Mongol Emperor of China. His account of these travels, dictated while imprisoned in Genoa, became one of medieval Europe's most popular books, though many of his contemporaries dismissed his tales as fantasy. He described paper money, coal burning for heat, and the vastness of Chinese cities, all of which seemed impossible to Europeans. Whether every detail of his account is accurate remains debated, but Marco Polo's book inspired generations of explorers, including a young Christopher Columbus, who owned a heavily annotated copy. The Silk Road had produced not just wealth, but wonder. The Mongol courts became centers of extraordinary cultural exchange. Fact 39. Kublai Khan's court in Khanbalik, modern-day Beijing, hosted visitors from across the known world. Alongside Marco Polo, there were Persian astronomers helping to reform the Chinese calendar, Russian craftsmen, European mercenaries, Arab merchants, and Tibetan monks. The great Khan employed people based on merit rather than ethnicity, creating one of history's most cosmopolitan governments. Artists and scholars from different traditions worked side by side, creating fusion styles in art, architecture, and literature. A Chinese dragon might be painted with Persian techniques, or a Mongol warrior depicted in a style borrowed from Byzantine iconography. The Silk Road had created not just trade routes, but a genuinely multicultural civilization. Religion, continued to flow along these routes in fascinating ways. Fact 40. Nestorian Christianity, considered heretical by both Catholic and Orthodox churches, found a home along the Silk Road. Nestorian communities flourished in Central Asian cities and even reached China, where they were known as the Luminous Religion. The famous Nestorian stele, discovered in Xi'an and dating to 781 CE, describes Christian teachings using Buddhist and Taoist terminology, showing how the religion adapted to its new cultural context. At the same time, Islam was spreading eastward. Judaism had ancient communities along the route, and Buddhism continued to evolve. In some Silk Road cities, you could find temples, mosques, churches, and synagogues standing within blocks of each other, their faithful all benefiting from the same trade networks. The goods traveling the Silk Road became increasingly diverse and sophisticated. Fact 41. By the medieval period, the trade had expanded far beyond silk and spices. Chinese porcelain, called China in the West, became highly prized, so valuable that pieces were sometimes mounted in gold and silver settings. Rhubarb, used as a medicine, was worth its weight in gold in some markets. Musk from Tibetan deer, used in perfumes, traveled in tiny quantities but commanded enormous prices. Carpets from Persia, musical instruments, books and manuscripts, exotic birds, and even ideas about governance and philosophy all moved along these routes. A wealthy merchant's home might contain treasures from a dozen different lands, each object carrying stories of the journey that brought it there. But the Silk Road also carried mathematical and scientific knowledge that would reshape human understanding. Fact 42. The concept of zero, developed in India, traveled along the Silk Road to the Islamic world, where mathematicians like Al-Khwarizmi incorporated it into the decimal system we use today. Astronomical observations from Chinese, Indian, Persian, and Greek traditions were compiled and compared in Silk Road cities, leading to more accurate calendars and better understanding of celestial mechanics. Medical knowledge from the Greek physician Galen was preserved and expanded upon by Islamic scholars, who added insights from Chinese and Indian medicine. These intellectual exchanges, happening in caravanserais and courts along the Silk Road, laid groundwork for the scientific revolution that would come centuries later. The practicalities of long-distance trade created surprisingly modern business innovation. Fact 43. Silk Road merchants developed early forms of banking and credit systems to avoid the danger of carrying gold and silver across thousands of miles. A merchant in Baghdad could deposit money and receive a paper certificate, then redeem it for cash in Samarkand or even China. These flying money systems, as the Chinese called them, were predecessors to modern checks and letters of credit. Merchants also formed partnerships and companies that could pool resources and share risks, creating early forms of corporate structure. Insurance, though in a primitive form, allowed merchants to protect themselves against losses from theft, shipwreck, or confiscation. The Silk Road was inventing not just trade routes, but the very mechanisms of international commerce. Fashion and status became intimately connected to Silk Road goods across all the civilizations it touched. Fact 44. In China, owning Persian carpets and Central Asian horses signaled elite status. In Persia, Chinese porcelain and silk demonstrated wealth and refinement. In Europe, spices and silk became markers of nobility. Sumptuary laws sometimes restricted who could wear certain colors or fabrics, with silk often reserved for the aristocracy. The Catholic Church used silk vestments from the East in important ceremonies. Even food became a status symbol. The ability to heavily spice one's food with pepper, cinnamon, and cloves from distant lands showed wealth and sophistication. The Silk Road had created a global luxury economy where a merchant in Venice and a mandarin in Beijing might both seek the same exotic goods to demonstrate their position in society. Yet even as the Silk Road flourished, forces were gathering that would eventually diminish it. Fact 45. The fragmentation of the Mongol Empire in the mid-14th century began to make overland travel more dangerous again. The various successor states often fought among themselves, and the guaranteed safety of the Pax Mongolica evaporated. At the same time, the Ottoman Empire's rise and eventual conquest of Constantinople in 1453 gave them control over Western Silk Road terminals. While the Ottomans didn't close the routes, they did tax them heavily, making the overland trade less profitable. European merchants began to look for alternative routes to the east, routes that would bypass the Silk Road middlemen entirely. The age of maritime exploration was about to begin, and it would fundamentally change how East and West connected. As our caravan rests in a caravanserai that has sheltered travelers for centuries, its walls covered with carved inscriptions in a dozen languages, we pause to reflect on how this great network of routes has shaped human civilization. The merchants sleep soundly tonight, unaware that the world is changing, that new routes will soon be discovered that will shift the currents of trade. But for now, the Silk Road still pulses with life, with commerce, with the endless human desire to connect, to trade, to share stories across the vastness of the world. The sun rises over a changing world, where new forces are reshaping the ancient patterns of trade. European ships are beginning to venture into unknown waters, seeking direct routes to the Spice Islands and the silks of Cathay. Yet the overland Silk Road, though declining, still pulses with life and continues to leave its mark on history in unexpected ways. Fact 46. The fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 is often cited as a pivotal moment that spurred European exploration. But the reality was more complex. The Ottomans didn't close the Silk Road. They were pragmatic rulers who profited from trade taxes. However, they did control the Western terminals and could set prices, which motivated European merchants to seek alternative routes. Venice and Genoa, the great Italian trading republics that had grown wealthy as Silk Road middlemen, began to lose their advantageous position. This economic pressure, combined with improvements in navigation technology and ship design, set the stage for the Age of Discovery. The search for a sea route to bypass the Silk Road would accidentally lead to the discovery of the Americas. Even as maritime routes developed, the overland Silk Road maintained its importance in surprising ways. Fact 47. The city of Bukhara in modern Uzbekistan reached its cultural and commercial peak in the 16th century, long after the supposed decline of the Silk Road. Under the Shaibanid dynasty, Bukhara became known as the noble, the sublime, a center of Islamic learning that attracted scholars from across the Muslim world. Its madrasas educated students in mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and theology. The city's covered bazaars, some of which still operate today, created a permanent marketplace where merchants from Persia, Russia, India, and China continued to trade. The Silk Road hadn't died. It had simply evolved, with some routes gaining importance while others faded. The artistic legacy of the Silk Road became permanently embedded in cultures across Eurasia. Fact 48. Chinese blue and white porcelain, developed during the Yuan dynasty in the 14th century, was actually inspired by Persian cobalt blue ceramics that had arrived via the Silk Road. The Chinese perfected the technique and then exported it back westward, where it influenced Persian and Turkish pottery in turn. This circular exchange created artistic traditions that became defining features of their respective cultures. Similarly, the arabesque patterns of Islamic art influenced Chinese decorative arts, while Chinese cloud motifs appeared in Persian miniature paintings. The Silk Road had created a visual language that transcended borders, a shared artistic vocabulary that still resonates today. The role of women in Silk Road trade has often been overlooked, but they were more involved than historical accounts might suggest. Fact 49. In Sogdian merchant families, women often managed businesses while their husbands traveled, sometimes for years at a time. They kept accounts, made trading decisions, and negotiated with local merchants. In the Mongol Empire, women could own property and run businesses independently. Some Mongol merchant women became quite wealthy in their own right. Chinese and Persian women were involved in silk production, from raising silkworms to weaving elaborate patterns. The wives and daughters of caravanserai owners often managed these establishments, providing hospitality and ensuring the smooth operation of these crucial rest stops. The Silk Road's prosperity rested not just on the camels and ships, but on the often invisible labor and business acumen of countless women. Musical instruments and melodies traveled the Silk Road, creating new sounds and traditions. Fact 50. The pipa, now considered a quintessentially Chinese instrument, actually originated in Persia as the barbat and traveled eastward along the Silk Road during the Tang Dynasty. The Chinese adopted and modified it, and it became central to Chinese classical music. Similarly, the lute traveled from the Middle East to Europe, where it became fundamental to Western music. Percussion instruments, wind instruments, and even musical notation systems were exchanged. In the courts of Tang Dynasty China, orchestras featured musicians from across Central Asia, playing Persian, Indian, and local instruments together, creating fusion music that anticipated modern world music by more than a millennium. The impact of Silk Road cuisine extended far beyond spices. Fact 51. Noodles, one of the world's most universal foods, may have traveled both directions along the Silk Road. Whether they originated in China or the Middle East remains debated, but they certainly spread via these trade routes. Dumplings appeared in various forms from China to Central Asia to Eastern Europe, each culture adapting the basic concept. Tea drinking, a Chinese tradition, spread to Central Asia and eventually to Europe, though it would take centuries. Wine-making techniques traveled from the Mediterranean to China. The samosa, now associated with Indian cuisine, likely originated in the Middle East before traveling eastward. Every time you eat pasta, dumplings, or drink tea, you're partaking in the Silk Road's culinary legacy. The decline of the overland routes coincided with remarkable final flowerings of culture. Fact 52. The Timurid Renaissance of the 14th and 15th centuries, centered in cities like Samarkand and Herat, produced some of the Islamic world's greatest artistic and scientific achievements. The astronomer Ulugh Beg, grandson of Timur, built an observatory in Samarkand that produced the most accurate star catalog before the telescope age. Artists created exquisite miniature paintings, blending Persian, Chinese, and Central Asian styles. Poets like Jami and Navoy wrote masterpieces that are still celebrated today. This cultural explosion happened precisely because these cities sat at the crossroads of the Silk Road, absorbing and synthesizing influences from all directions. Even as the trade routes declined economically, they continued to foster cultural brilliance. The spiritual and philosophical exchanges of the Silk Road had lasting impacts on how people thought about the world. Fact 53. The concept of religious tolerance, though imperfect by modern standards, was more advanced in many Silk Road cities than in contemporary Europe. The practical necessity of getting along with people of different faiths in cosmopolitan trading centers created an ethos of coexistence. The Mongol Empire's official policy of religious freedom, Mongol rulers patronized Buddhist monasteries, Islamic mosques, Christian churches, and shamanistic practices simultaneously, demonstrated a pragmatic pluralism. These experiences of multi-faith communities along the Silk Road influenced later Islamic empires' relatively tolerant dhimmi systems and may have planted seeds for modern concepts of religious freedom. Even as European ships began sailing around Africa to reach Asia, the Silk Road adapted once more. Fact 54. The northern route through Russia and Siberia gained new importance in the 16th and 17th centuries as Russian expansion created more secure passage. The Great Tea Road emerged, carrying Chinese tea to Russia and Europe via camel caravans through Mongolia and Siberia, a journey that could take 18 months. Russian merchants established trading posts and cities along this route. Meanwhile, the Qing dynasty in China continued to maintain and protect portions of the Silk Road, seeing it as strategically important for controlling their western territories. The road had changed, fragmented, and diminished, but it hadn't entirely disappeared. It had simply become one of many routes connecting east and west rather than the primary artery. As the moon rises over an ancient caravanserai, now hosting fewer travelers than in centuries past, the old stones remember the countless footsteps that have crossed their threshold. The Silk Road is transforming, yielding primacy to maritime routes, yet its influence continues to shape the world in ways both visible and invisible. Tomorrow, we'll explore how this legendary network is remembered, rediscovered, and reimagined, and how its legacy continues into our modern age. But tonight, rest peacefully, knowing that the spirit of connection and exchange that drove the Silk Road lives on. We find ourselves now in a quieter time along the ancient routes, where the great caravans have thinned, where some cities that once thrived have been reclaimed by the desert sands. Yet the Silk Road's story is far from over. Its physical traces remain, waiting to be rediscovered, and its influence continues to shape our world in ways both profound and subtle. Fact 55. The 18th and 19th centuries saw European explorers and archaeologists begin to rediscover the Silk Road's lost cities and treasures. Swedish explorer Sven Hedin ventured into the Taklamakan Desert in the 1890s, finding ancient ruins buried beneath the sand. British archaeologist R.L. Stein made several expeditions between 1900 and 1916, discovering forgotten cities, Buddhist manuscripts, and artwork that had been preserved for centuries in the dry desert climate. French sinologist Paul Pelliot explored the Mogao caves and acquired thousands of manuscripts. These expeditions, controversial today for removing artifacts from their original locations, nevertheless brought the Silk Road's history back into global consciousness and sparked renewed interest in this ancient network. The treasures removed from Dunhuang's library cave alone revolutionized our understanding of medieval Asia. Fact 56. Among the 50,000 documents discovered in the sealed cave were the world's oldest printed book, the Diamond Sutra from 868 CE, proving that printing existed in China centuries before Gutenberg. There were Buddhist sutras in dozens of languages and scripts, Taoist texts, Confucian classics, contracts, letters, and even musical scores. One document was a multilingual dictionary showing how Silk Road merchants learned each other's languages. These papers preserved voices from across the Silk Road world. Merchants' business letters complaining about dishonest partners, monks' philosophical debates, government officials' reports, and children's school exercises. It was as if a time capsule had preserved the daily life of the Silk Road for future generations. The physical infrastructure of the Silk Road left marks on the landscape that endure to this day. Fact 57. Many sections of the ancient routes are still visible from the air or on the ground. In the deserts of Xinjiang, paths worn by countless caravans remain etched into the earth. Watchtowers built by the Han Dynasty still stand in long lines across the Gobi Desert. Weathered but recognizable, sections of caravanserais, though ruined, dot the landscape from Turkey to China. Some bridges, built for Silk Road traffic, are still in use after more than 1,000 years. The city of Kashgar's Old Bazaar, though modernized, still operates on the same site where merchants have traded for 2 millennia. These physical remnants connect us directly to the merchants and travelers whose footsteps wore these paths smooth. The Silk Road's genetic legacy is written in the DNA of populations across Eurasia. Fact 58. Modern genetic studies have revealed the traces of ancient migrations and mixing along the Silk Road routes. Central Asian populations show genetic markers from both East Asian and European ancestries, evidence of the intermarriage and population movements that occurred over millennia. The spread of certain genetic traits, like lactose tolerance, can be traced along former Silk Road routes. Even diseases have left genetic signatures. Populations along the Silk Road show genetic adaptations to plague and other epidemics that traveled these routes. In a very literal sense, the people living along the former Silk Road routes carry within them the biological legacy of these ancient connections. The linguistic impact of the Silk Road created a web of borrowed words that spans the globe. Fact 59. The English word bazaar comes from Persian, which got it from Silk Road trade. Candy derives from the Sanskrit kanda, meaning sugar, which traveled via Persian to Arabic to European languages. Orange comes from Sanskrit naranga, traveling through Persian and Arabic before reaching Europe. Tea in English comes from the Chinese Fujian dialect pronunciation te, brought by Dutch traders, while chai, used in many other languages, comes from the Mandarin cha. Even words like check in chess, checkmate, rook, and pawn all have Persian origins, traveling along cultural exchange routes. Our everyday vocabulary is studded with words that journeyed along the Silk Road. The romantic image of the Silk Road captured imaginations and influenced art and literature worldwide. Fact 60. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Western artists and writers became fascinated with what they imagined as the exotic Orient, partly inspired by Silk Road discoveries. Composers like Rimsky-Korsakov created works like Scheherazade, evoking imagined Eastern lands. Painters depicted caravans crossing deserts and bustling bazaars. Writers penned adventure tales set along the Silk Road. While these romantic visions were often more fantasy than fact, they helped keep the idea of the Silk Road alive in popular imagination. The British poet James Elroy Flecker wrote The Golden Journey to Samarkand, with its famous opening, "We who with songs beguile your pilgrimage," lines that captured the poetic allure of these ancient routes. The 20th century brought new conflicts and ideologies to Silk Road lands, but also new connections. Fact 61. During the Cold War, the Silk Road regions became contested territory between Soviet and Western influences, with China asserting its own interests. The ancient routes that had once connected civilizations became divided by the Iron Curtain and later by various conflicts. Yet even during this period, cultural exchanges continued in modified forms. The Soviet Union promoted archaeological research along Silk Road sites within its territory. China began to recognize the tourism potential of Silk Road heritage. Academic conferences brought together scholars from different political systems to discuss their shared Silk Road past. Even in an age of ideological division, the Silk Road's legacy as a symbol of connection and exchange remained powerful. The late 20th century saw renewed interest in actually traveling the historic Silk Road routes. Fact 62. Adventurous travelers began following the ancient paths, writing books, and making documentaries about their journeys. The overland route from Istanbul to Beijing became a classic adventure travel itinerary. The Karakoram Highway, opened in 1979 between Pakistan and China, follows ancient Silk Road routes through some of the world's most spectacular mountain scenery. UNESCO began designating Silk Road sites as World Heritage locations, recognizing their universal cultural value. Cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, Xi'an and Isfahan began restoring historic buildings and caravanserais, transforming them from ruins into tourist destinations. The Silk Road was being reborn, not as a trade route, but as a journey of cultural discovery. Modern archaeology continues to reveal new Silk Road secrets. Fact 63. In recent decades, archaeologists using satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and other technologies have discovered previously unknown Silk Road sites. Ancient cities, thought lost forever, have been found beneath desert sands. In 2014, scientists in Uzbekistan discovered a 2,000-year-old rest stop for Silk Road travelers, complete with sleeping quarters and stables. Climate change, ironically, has revealed artifacts previously locked in ice in high mountain passes. Underwater archaeology has explored shipwrecks from the maritime Silk Road, finding cargoes of ceramics, spices, and other goods frozen in time. Each discovery adds new details to our understanding of how this vast network actually functioned, who used it, and what they carried. As night settles over lands that once knew the constant passage of caravans, the stars shine with the same light that guided travelers 1,000 years ago. The physical Silk Road may have faded, but its story continues to unfold through archaeology, scholarship, and human imagination. Tomorrow, we'll explore how the Silk Road's legacy lives on in our modern world, and how new Silk Roads are being envisioned for the future. Rest now and dream of caravans and distant cities, of merchant songs and temple bells, of the endless human journey toward connection. In our modern age of instant communication and jet travel, it might seem that the Silk Road belongs entirely to history, a romantic relic of a slower, more mysterious world. Yet the spirit of the Silk Road, the drive to connect distant peoples, to exchange goods and ideas across vast distances, continues to shape our world in remarkable ways. Fact 64. In 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, explicitly invoking the Silk Road's legacy. This massive infrastructure project aims to build modern transportation, energy, and communication networks connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa, essentially creating a 21st century Silk Road. The initiative includes railways across Central Asia, ports along maritime routes from China to the Mediterranean, fiber optic cables, and oil pipelines. Whether it succeeds in fostering the kind of mutual prosperity and cultural exchange that characterized the ancient Silk Road, or becomes something else entirely, remains to be seen. But the fact that modern powers invoke the Silk Road's name shows how deeply this ancient network has embedded itself in our collective imagination as a symbol of beneficial connection. The cities that prospered along the ancient Silk Road are experiencing renewed importance. Fact 65. Almaty in Kazakhstan, Tashkent in Uzbekistan, and Urumqi in China, all ancient Silk Road cities, are becoming modern hubs once again. New highways, railways, and airports are being built, echoing the infrastructure projects of ancient empires. The Marmaray Tunnel under the Bosphorus in Istanbul, opened in 2013, connects Europe and Asia just as Silk Road merchants once did, but now moving commuters rather than camel caravans. High-speed rail lines across China follow routes parallel to ancient Silk Road paths. The geography that made these cities important crossroads 2,000 years ago still matters in an age of global logistics. The cultural festivals and tourism along the Silk Road have created new forms of connection. Fact 66. The Silk Road Festival, held in various locations, celebrates the music, dance, and artistic traditions of Silk Road cultures. Musicians play instruments descended from those that traveled the ancient routes, the oud, the sitar, the guzheng, creating fusion music that echoes the cultural mixing of ancient caravanserais. Food festivals celebrate Silk Road cuisine, from hand-pulled noodles to pilaf to baklava. Tourism has brought economic revival to some struggling Silk Road cities, though it also raises questions about authenticity and preservation. Nevertheless, these festivals and tourist journeys create person-to-person connections across cultures, carrying forward the Silk Road's tradition of bringing distant peoples together. The museums of the world are filled with Silk Road treasures that tell silent stories. Fact 67. The British Museum houses Silk Road artifacts, including the Admonitions Scroll, a Chinese masterpiece carried westward. The Hermitage in St. Petersburg contains Central Asian treasures from Russian archaeological expeditions. The National Museum of China displays Silk Road relics from numerous excavations. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York has galleries devoted to the arts of the Silk Road. These scattered collections, controversial as their removal often was, allow people worldwide to encounter Silk Road cultures. A schoolchild in London or New York can stand before a Tang Dynasty ceramic camel loaded with goods, or a Persian silver plate, or a Buddhist manuscript from Dunhuang, and touch, however indirectly, the ancient world of the Silk Road. Academic study of the Silk Road has blossomed into a rich interdisciplinary field. Fact 68. Universities worldwide now offer Silk Road studies programs, bringing together historians, archaeologists, linguists, art historians, and scientists to understand this complex network. DNA analysis reveals migration patterns. Climate studies show how environmental changes affected trade routes. Textile analysis reveals ancient weaving techniques and trade patterns through fabric fragments. Numismatics, the study of coins, traces economic connections by following where different currencies traveled. Scholars study ancient accounting documents to understand business practices, medical texts to trace the spread of healing knowledge, and astronomical records to see how different civilizations influenced each other's understanding of the cosmos. The Silk Road has become a lens through which we examine the interconnected nature of human civilization. The metaphor of the Silk Road has been applied to many modern networks and exchanges. Fact 69. Scientists speak of the spice routes of science, referring to how knowledge travels between research centers worldwide. The Internet has been called a digital Silk Road, connecting the world through information rather than goods. Drug trafficking routes are grimly termed narco-silk roads by law enforcement. There's even a space-related project called the Silk Road Astronomy Initiative, fostering cooperation between space agencies. The term Silk Road has transcended its historical meaning to become shorthand for any network that connects distant places and facilitates exchange, a testament to how deeply this ancient concept resonates with fundamental human experiences of connection and trade. The preservation and restoration of Silk Road heritage sites presents both opportunities and challenges. Fact 70. UNESCO's Silk Roads program works to protect and promote Silk Road cultural heritage, but many sites face threats from development, climate change, and conflict. The Taliban's destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan in 2001 shocked the world and destroyed irreplaceable Silk Road art. Other sites deteriorate from lack of funding or expertise for proper conservation. However, successful restorations have occurred too. The old city of Khiva in Uzbekistan has been carefully preserved as a living museum. The terracotta army in Xi'an draws millions of visitors, generating revenue that supports preservation. Digital archaeology now creates virtual reconstructions of damaged or destroyed sites, allowing future generations to experience lost Silk Road treasures. The question of how to preserve the past while allowing communities to develop economically remains delicate and ongoing. Climate science has revealed how environmental changes affected the Silk Road throughout history. Fact 71. Paleoclimatology, the study of ancient climates, shows that periods of relative warmth and stable weather corresponded with Silk Road prosperity, while climate instability often disrupted trade. The medieval warm period from roughly 950 to 1250 CE coincided with peak Silk Road activity, as milder temperatures made mountain passes more accessible and extended the trading season. Conversely, the Little Ice Age that began in the 14th century made travel more difficult and may have contributed to the Silk Road's decline. Tree ring studies revealed drought patterns that affected oasis cities. Lake sediment cores show environmental changes. This research reminds us that the Silk Road wasn't just about human decisions. It existed within environmental constraints that ancient peoples couldn't control, but had to navigate with remarkable resilience. The food we eat today is deeply influenced by Silk Road exchanges, often in ways we don't recognize. Fact 72. The tomato, now central to Italian cuisine, actually originated in the Americas and reached Italy via Silk Road-era trade networks after Columbus. The chili pepper, crucial to Sichuan cuisine, followed a similar path. Conversely, oranges, native to China, spread westward along Silk Road routes centuries before Spanish conquistadors brought them to the New World. The banana traveled from Southeast Asia to Africa and eventually to the Americas. Coffee, native to Ethiopia, spread to Yemen and then along Silk Road networks to become Turkey's famous beverage before reaching Europe. Every time we eat pizza, kung pao chicken, or drink coffee, we're consuming the legacy of ancient trade networks that knitted the world together long before the modern global economy. The Silk Road didn't just connect ancient civilizations, it created the foundations of our modern global food system. As the night deepens and we contemplate these modern echoes of ancient roots, we realize that the Silk Road never truly ended. It simply transformed. the same human impulses that sent merchants across deserts and mountains, the same curiosity about distant lands, the same desire for connection and exchange continue to drive our world. Let these thoughts drift through your mind as you relax, knowing that you are part of this ongoing story of human connection. As we near the end of our journey through Silk Road history, we turn to some of the more intimate and surprising details of this vast network, the small human stories, the unexpected consequences, and the daily realities that made the Silk Road not just a grand historical force, but a lived experience for countless individuals across centuries. Fact 73. The languages that developed along the Silk Road reveal its cosmopolitan nature in fascinating ways. Sogdian, the language of those master merchants, became a lingua franca of trade, and Sogdian alphabet systems were adapted to write Turkic, Mongolian, and other languages. The Uyghur script, still used in modified form today, descends from Sogdian, which itself came from Aramaic, a linguistic chain stretching from the ancient Middle East to modern Central Asia. Meanwhile, loanwords infiltrated every language along the route. Persian words entered Chinese, Chinese words entered Persian, Sanskrit influenced both, and Arabic eventually permeated the entire central corridor. Some Silk Road cities had professional translators who could work in 5 or 6 languages, essential intermediaries making communication possible across the network's vast linguistic diversity. The animals of the Silk Road deserve their own recognition beyond the famous Bactrian camel. Fact 74. Yaks carried goods over the highest mountain passes of the Himalayas and Tibet, their thick fur protecting them in conditions that would kill other pack animals. Donkeys, often overlooked in favor of more exotic creatures, actually did much of the hard work on difficult terrain, their sure-footedness invaluable in mountain regions. Horses, bred in different regions, had different specialties. The blood-sweating Ferghana horses we mentioned earlier, the sturdy Mongolian ponies that carried Genghis Khan's armies, the Arabian horses prized in China. Dogs guarded caravans against wolves and thieves. Even carrier pigeons were used to send messages ahead, anticipating a caravan's arrival or warning of dangers. The Silk Road was a multi-species endeavor, and without these animal partners, it could not have functioned. The role of slavery and forced labor along the Silk Road is a darker aspect often glossed over. Fact 75. Enslaved people were themselves traded along Silk Road routes, particularly from Central Asia and Eastern Europe into the Islamic world and China. Some worked as domestic servants, others as laborers, and some as soldiers. The famous Mamluk warriors who eventually ruled Egypt were originally enslaved Turkic people, brought via Silk Road networks. Prisoners of war from the constant border conflicts were often sold into slavery. This human trafficking was a significant, if grim, part of Silk Road commerce. At the same time, some enslaved people managed to gain freedom and even prominence. Certain merchants, scholars, and military commanders rose from enslaved origins, showing the complex and sometimes contradictory nature of societies along the route. Musical notation and the spread of musical theory traveled the Silk Road alongside instruments. Fact 76. The Chinese Qin zither tradition influenced Korean and Japanese court music. Indian ragas and rhythmic systems spread to Persia and influenced the development of Persian classical music's modal system. Arab musical theorists' works, building on Greek foundations, eventually reached Europe and influenced the development of Western music theory. The Silk Road even carried dance forms. Central Asian whirling dances influenced both Chinese court performances and eventually contributed to the Sufi whirling dervishes of Turkey. Music and dance, like so much else, were transformed by their journey along the Silk Road, each culture adding its own flavor while preserving echoes of distant origins. The concept of time itself was affected by Silk Road exchanges, Fact 77. Different civilizations used different calendar systems, and coordinating trade, festivals, and diplomatic meetings across these systems required sophisticated conversion methods. Chinese lunar calendars, Persian solar calendars, Islamic lunar calendars, and various local systems all operated along the Silk Road. Merchants had to master multiple calendar systems to ensure they arrived at markets on the right dates. The exchange of astronomical knowledge helped improve calendar accuracy. Chinese astronomers learned from Persian observations. Persian astronomers incorporated Indian mathematical techniques, and these improvements in timekeeping benefited all the civilizations along the route. The very way people organized and thought about time was shaped by Silk Road connections. Personal hygiene and beauty practices spread along the Silk Road in surprising ways. Fact 78. Soap-making techniques traveled from the Middle East to both Europe and Asia. Chinese cosmetics influenced Persian and Central Asian beauty practices, while Persian perfumes became prized in China. The Indian practice of using henna spread westward and eastward. Public bathhouses, important in Roman, Persian, and later Islamic cultures, were established in Silk Road cities, becoming social centers where business was conducted and information exchanged. Even dental hygiene practices spread. The use of chew sticks for cleaning teeth, tooth powders made from various ingredients, and early forms of toothpaste all traveled along trade routes. These intimate, daily practices show how deeply the Silk Road influenced everyday life beyond just luxury goods. The astronomy and astrology practiced along the Silk Road merged observation with belief in fascinating ways. Fact 79. Chinese astronomers kept detailed records of comets, eclipses, and supernovae that are still valuable to modern science. These records were sometimes shared with Persian and Arab astronomers, who combined them with Greek astronomical theories and Indian mathematical techniques. Astrology, the belief that celestial events influence earthly affairs, was taken seriously everywhere along the Silk Road, and astrological systems were exchanged and merged. A court astrologer in Tang Dynasty China might use techniques derived from Persian and Indian sources alongside traditional Chinese methods. The great astronomical observatories built in Samarkand, Beijing, and other cities were centers of both scientific observation and astrological practice, showing how the line between science and belief was different in the past. Writing materials themselves evolved through Silk Road exchanges. Fact 80. Before paper reached the West, Europeans wrote on parchment made from animal skins, while Egyptians used papyrus. The Chinese invention of paper, made from plant fibers, was revolutionary. Cheaper, lighter, and easier to produce than either alternative. But paper itself evolved as it spread. Islamic papermakers improved Chinese techniques, adding starch to make paper smoother for calligraphy. Different regions used different plant materials. Bamboo in China, flax and hemp in Central Asia, cotton in the Islamic world. The development of different paper types for different purposes, rough paper for wrapping goods, smooth paper for painting, sized paper for calligraphy, occurred through the sharing of techniques along the Silk Road. Even the humble paper on which someone might write a shopping list today descends from technologies perfected through Silk Road exchanges. The gardens created along the Silk Road were marvels of engineering and aesthetics. Fact 81. The Persian concept of the paradise garden, an enclosed space with water channels, fruit trees, and flowers, spread both eastward to Central Asia and India, where it influenced the Mughal gardens, and westward to Spain, where Islamic gardens still delight visitors to the Alhambra. Chinese garden design, with its emphasis on creating miniature landscapes and incorporating rocks and water, influenced Korean and Japanese gardens. The very plants in these gardens were often Silk Road travelers. Tulips from Central Asia reached both Persia and eventually Holland. Chrysanthemums from China spread westward. Roses were cultivated and hybridized in Persian gardens before spreading. These gardens were oases of beauty and tranquility along the harsh trade routes, places where exhausted travelers could rest among flowers and fountains, perhaps dreaming of the gardens waiting in their distant homes. As we rest in one of these ancient gardens in our imagination, listening to the sound of water flowing through marble channels, surrounded by roses whose ancestors might have grown in a garden 1,000 miles away, we can feel the peace that Silk Road travelers must have felt in these sanctuaries. Tomorrow, we'll complete our journey with final reflections on the Silk Road's enduring legacy. But for now, let the gentle sounds of a Silk Road garden lull you towards sleep. We approach the final stretch of our journey through Silk Road history, where we gather the remaining threads of this vast tapestry and reflect on the smaller wonders and lasting mysteries that make the Silk Road endlessly fascinating. These final facts remind us that even after centuries of study, the Silk Road still holds secrets and continues to surprise us. Fact 82. The postal and courier systems developed along the Silk Road were remarkably sophisticated for their time. Beyond the Persian and Mongol systems we've mentioned, the Chinese Tang dynasty established postal relay stations every 30 miles along major routes, with different types of stations for different classes of travelers. Some for official couriers, others for merchants, and some for military purposes. Couriers carried bronze or silver fish-shaped tokens as identification, and the speed of message delivery was strictly regulated. Urgent imperial messages were expected to cover up to 180 miles per day, with couriers riding horses to exhaustion before switching to fresh mounts. These ancient postal systems were among the most efficient communication networks before the age of telegraph, and their organizational principles influenced postal services worldwide. The role of children and families in Silk Road trade reveals its human dimension. Fact 83. Merchant families often raised their children on the road, with boys learning the family trade from an early age. how to evaluate goods, bargain effectively, speak multiple languages, and navigate treacherous routes. Some merchant families traveled together, their caravans including wives, children, and elderly relatives, creating mobile communities. Children born along the route might be named after the cities where they first saw light. Some merchants' sons were sent to live in distant trading posts for years, learning local languages and customs, becoming cultural bridges. The loneliness of these separated families, fathers absent for years at a time, children who might not recognize parents who finally returned, was part of the hidden cost of Silk Road trade. Funeral practices and burial customs along the Silk Road created unintended archaeological treasures. Fact 84. In the dry climates of the Taklamakan Desert and surrounding regions, bodies and burial goods were naturally mummified, preserving them for thousands of years. The famous Tarim Basin mummies, some dating back nearly 4,000 years, show surprising European features far from Europe, suggesting ancient migrations we're only now beginning to understand. These mummies were buried with their possessions, clothing made from fabrics that came from distant lands, food for the afterlife, tools, and jewelry, creating time capsules that tell us more about daily life than any written record. Even the diseases they suffered from, preserved in their remains, tell us about health conditions and what remedies might have traveled the Silk Road. The environmental knowledge required to survive and thrive along the Silk Road was extensive and sophisticated. Fact 85. Desert travelers learned to read the landscape for signs of water. Certain plants indicated underground moisture. The flight patterns of birds at dawn and dusk pointed toward water sources, and the behavior of camels could alert experienced handlers to nearby wells. Mountain guides passed down knowledge of passes, weather patterns, and avalanche risks through generations. Oasis farmers developed intricate water management systems, knowing exactly how to distribute precious water resources fairly among fields. This environmental expertise, accumulated over centuries and passed from master to apprentice, was as valuable as any trade good. Knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death in harsh terrain. Medical practitioners along the Silk Road developed treatments using ingredients from across the known world. Fact 86. A single pharmacy in Baghdad might stock rhubarb from China, used as a laxative and digestive aid, camphor from Indonesia, aloe from Arabia, saffron from Persia, and ginger from India, a global pharmacopoeia made possible by Silk Road trade. Traveling physicians carried portable medicine chests with compartments for different remedies. Medical texts describe drugs using multiple names from different languages, recognizing that the same substance might be called different things in different places. Some treatments combined medical traditions. A physician might use Greek humoral theory to diagnose, Chinese pulse reading to confirm, and Indian herbal remedies to treat, creating a truly international medicine. The textiles traded along the Silk Road were far more diverse than just silk. Fact 87. Cotton textiles from India, woolen fabrics from Central Asia, linen from Egypt, and fur pelts from Siberia all moved along these routes. Each region developed distinctive weaving techniques and patterns. The ikats, of Central Asia with their blurred, tie-dyed designs, the brocades of China with metallic threads, the carpets of Persia with their intricate knotwork. The knowledge of dyes was jealously guarded. The secret of Tyrian purple from Mediterranean murex snails, the cochineal red from Mexican insects after it reached the Old World, and the indigo blues from India. Textile merchants needed to understand not just fabrics, but dyes, weaving techniques, and regional preferences. A merchant specializing in textiles was a master of a complex technical and artistic field. The fortifications and military architecture along the Silk Road tell stories of constant vigilance. At 88, the Great Wall of China, often thought of as a single structure, was actually a series of walls built over centuries, and its western sections specifically protected Silk Road routes from northern raiders. Cities built thick walls with elaborate gate systems where goods could be inspected and taxed. Some Silk Road cities had double or triple walls, outer walls for defense, inner walls protecting the citadel where rulers lived and treasures were stored. Watchtowers could communicate by fire signals at night and smoke by day, creating a visual telegraph system. These military structures remind us that the Silk Road, for all its cultural exchange and prosperity, existed in a world where conflict was never far away, and security required constant investment and vigilance. The games and entertainment that traveled the Silk Road provide glimpses into leisure and play. Fact 89. Chess originated in India as chaturanga, traveled through Persia where it evolved into shatranj, and eventually reached China where it became xiangqi and Europe where it became modern chess. Playing cards, invented in China, spread westward and were adapted differently in each culture they reached, leading to the multiple card deck systems still used today. Polo, the sport of kings, originated in Persia and spread to Tang Dynasty China, where it became immensely popular among the aristocracy, then later to British India, and eventually worldwide. Dice games, board games like backgammon, and various forms of gambling spread along the routes. Even storytelling traditions influenced each other. Frame narratives where one story contains multiple other stories, found in both the 1001 Nights and Chinese story collections, may represent shared narrative techniques developed along the Silk Road. The legal and contractual systems that governed trade grew increasingly sophisticated. Fact 90. Merchants developed standardized contract forms for partnerships, with clauses covering profit sharing, liability for losses, dispute resolution, and what happened if one partner died during a journey. Letters of credit evolved to allow merchants to access funds in distant cities without carrying dangerous amounts of cash. Systems of commercial law developed to handle disputes between merchants from different cultures, sometimes using arbitration by respected senior merchants rather than formal courts. The concept of limited liability partnerships, where investors could support ventures without risking more than their initial investment, emerged in Islamic commercial law and eventually influenced European commercial development. These legal innovations, developed to facilitate Silk Road trade, became foundations of modern commercial law used in business worldwide. As we reach the end of our journey through these 90 facts, imagine yourself standing once more in Xi'an where we began, but now with the weight of all this history resting lightly on your shoulders. You've traveled in your mind across deserts and mountains, through empires risen and fallen, alongside merchants and monks, scholars and soldiers, all connected by these ancient roots. The Silk Road was never just about silk. It was about the fundamental human drive to connect, to exchange, to reach across distances and differences in pursuit of something valuable, whether that was profit, knowledge, faith, or simply the satisfaction of seeing what lay beyond the next horizon. Let these images and stories drift gently through your consciousness as you settle into peaceful rest. We arrive now at the final leg of our journey through Silk Road history, where we gather the last precious threads of knowledge about this extraordinary network. These final 9 facts will bring our story full circle, connecting the ancient past to our present moment and reminding us that the Silk Road's influence continues to ripple through time. Fact 91. The concept of hospitality that developed along the Silk Road created cultural expectations that still influence societies today. In many Central Asian and Middle Eastern cultures, the traditions of welcoming strangers, offering food and shelter to travelers, and treating guests as sacred trusts descend directly from Silk Road customs. When survival in harsh environments depended on mutual aid, elaborate codes of hospitality evolved. A traveler could claim food and lodging for 3 days without question, and harming a guest was considered among the gravest of sins. These weren't just practical arrangements, but spiritual obligation. The Persian and Arab concept of mehmani, hospitality, and the Central Asian mihman nawazi, the duty to guests, still shape social interactions in these regions. Ancient Silk Road values living on in modern practices. The pigments and colors used in Silk Road art reveal a global trade in beauty itself. Fact 92. Lapis lazuli, the brilliant blue stone mined in Afghanistan's Badakhshan region for over 6,000 years, was ground into ultramarine pigment and used in artworks from Chinese Buddhist paintings to European Renaissance masterpieces. The same Afghan lapis that colored Persian miniatures also illuminated medieval European manuscripts and later adorned Vermeer's paintings. Cinnabar from Chinese mines provided vermilion red across Asia. Indian yellow, made from the urine of cows fed only mango leaves, traveled westward. Persian painters developed techniques for creating gold leaf, so thin it seemed to glow with inner light. The palette of Silk Road art was itself a product of trade, with colors sourced from across the known world and combined in ways that created regional styles of breathtaking beauty. The transmission of agricultural knowledge along the Silk Road transformed how people farmed and what they ate. Fact 93. Irrigation techniques developed in one region spread to others. The Qanat system of underground water channels from Persia was adopted across Central Asia and reached as far as China. Crop rotation practices, grafting techniques for fruit trees, and methods for preserving foods all traveled along trade routes. The concept of the orchard as a planned agricultural space with diverse fruit trees selected and cultivated together spread from Persia throughout the Silk Road regions. Even specific cultivars of fruits spread. The famous Samarkand melons, So sweet, they were sent as tribute to Chinese emperors packed in lead boxes filled with snow, represented centuries of selective breeding, and their seeds traveled to establish new melon-growing regions elsewhere. The influence of Silk Road architectural styles created fusion aesthetics that still define regional architecture. Fact 94. The Buddhist cave temples of China show clear influence from Indian and Central Asian prototypes, but evolved into uniquely Chinese forms. Islamic architecture in Central Asia combined Persian domes, Arab calligraphy, and local brickworking traditions to create the stunning tilework and massive portals that characterize cities like Samarkand. The pagoda architecture of East Asia descended from Indian stupas that traveled the Silk Road with Buddhism, transforming along the way. Even the design of caravanserais influenced European inn architecture through returning crusaders. These architectural cross-pollinations created regional styles that were simultaneously distinctive and internationally influenced, buildings that couldn't exist without the Silk Road's cultural exchanges. The spread of epidemic diseases along the Silk Road wasn't limited to the Black Death. Fact 95. Smallpox, measles, and other infectious diseases also traveled these routes, sometimes with devastating effects when they reached populations with no previous exposure. But the Silk Road also facilitated the spread of medical knowledge about treating these diseases. Chinese physicians' techniques for variolation, an early form of inoculation against smallpox using material from mild cases, eventually reached the Ottoman Empire and then Europe, where it evolved into vaccination. The Silk Road carried both disease and the knowledge to fight disease, both curse and cure. This reminds us that connection has always been double-edged. The same networks that brought prosperity could also bring plague. The role of women as rulers and power brokers along the Silk Road deserves greater recognition. Fact 96. Empress Wu Zetian of Tang Dynasty China, the only woman to rule China in her own right, presided over a period of intensive Silk Road trade and cultural exchange. Mongol royal women like Sorghaghtani Beki wielded enormous power, managing trade networks and diplomacy, while their husbands and sons conquered empires. In Central Asian cities, women from wealthy merchant families sometimes managed substantial business interests. The Sogdian merchant culture allowed women significant economic roles. While patriarchal norms certainly existed everywhere along the Silk Road, the historical record shows women participating in trade, scholarship, and even governance more than stereotypical views of ancient societies might suggest. The mathematical and scientific instruments that traveled the Silk Road were themselves marvels of craftsmanship and knowledge. Fact 97. Astrolabes, complex astronomical calculators used for navigation and timekeeping, were refined in the Islamic world and spread both eastward and westward. Chinese astronomers developed sophisticated armillary spheres, elaborate mechanical models of the heavens that influenced astronomical instrument design across Asia. The abacus, developed in Mesopotamia and refined in China, spread throughout the Silk Road regions as an essential calculating tool for merchants and scholars alike. These instruments weren't just tools, but embodiments of mathematical and astronomical knowledge and skilled craftsmen who could construct them were highly valued in Silk Road cities. The precision metalwork and careful calibration required to make accurate instruments represented cutting-edge technology of the era. The influence of Silk Road aesthetics on contemporary fashion and design continues today. Fact 98. Modern fashion designers regularly draw inspiration from Silk Road cultures, using ikat patterns from Central Asia, incorporating Chinese silk brocades, adapting Persian carpet motifs, or reimagining Mongolian deal robes. Interior designers use Suzani embroideries from Uzbekistan, ceramic styles inspired by Islamic tile work, and furniture forms descended from Chinese and Central Asian prototypes. Even the concept of Bohemian style has Silk Road roots. The word Bohemian itself originally referred to people thought to come from Bohemia, but was applied to Romani people who actually migrated from India along routes parallel to the Silk Road. Contemporary global culture's appetite for exotic patterns, textiles, and designs descends directly from the aesthetic exchanges that occurred along ancient trade routes. And now we arrive at our final fact, the 99th piece of this vast puzzle. Fact 99. Perhaps the most important legacy of the Silk Road is not any single object, idea, or technology that traveled its length, but rather the proof it provides that human beings have always been connected, that cultures have always influenced each other, and that isolation has never been the natural state of civilization. At a time when our modern world sometimes seems fractured and divided, the Silk Road reminds us that for thousands of years people found ways to cross deserts and mountains, to bridge language barriers and cultural differences, to create networks of exchange and understanding that benefited everyone involved. The merchants who set out from Xi'an with bolts of silk, the monks who carried Buddhist sutras westward, the astronomers who shared observations of the stars, the musicians who taught each other new songs, all were building connections that enriched human civilization. The Silk Road teaches us that we are not separate civilizations that occasionally interact, but rather one human family that has always shared, traded, learned from each other, and grown together. In remembering the Silk Road, we remember our common heritage as curious, ambitious, creative people who have always reached beyond our immediate horizons toward connection with the wider world. As you drift toward sleep, imagine one last scene: a caravan silhouetted against a sunset sky, making its way along an ancient path worn smooth by countless travelers before. The bells on the camels create a gentle music, and in the distance, lights appear. Another caravanserai, another oasis of rest and hospitality. The journey continues, as it always has, as it always will, connecting distant places and different peoples, carrying goods and ideas, hopes and dreams across the vast and beautiful world that we all share. Rest now, traveler. Your journey along the Silk Road is complete. May your dreams be filled with ancient cities and distant mountains, with the scent of spices and the shimmer of silk, with the endless human story of connection and exchange that the Silk Road represents. Sleep peacefully, knowing that you are part of this great continuing story, this ancient and modern network of human connection that stretches across time and space linking all of us together in the great caravan of human civilization.